Part 2.3 Rules of Attaining Spiritual Perfection. To be able to advance on this spiritual path, it is necessary for a spiritual traveler to appoint some righteous man as preceptor, spiritual guide. The preceptor must have passed away from self and reached the station of everlasting abode in Allah. He should be fully aware of all the points which are to the advantage or disadvantage of a spiritual traveler, and should be capable of undertaking the training and guidance of other spiritual travelers. Moreover, remembrance and recollection of Allah and prayer to Him with humility are also necessary for a spiritual traveler. Besides, to be able to pass all the stages of spiritual path successfully, it is necessary for him to observe certain rules. 1. Renunciation of customs, usages, and social formalities. It means to refrain from all those formalities which are related to mere customs or stylish living, and which are a hindrance in the way of the spiritual traveler, who is required to live among the people, but to lead a simple and balanced life. Some people are so absorbed in social formalities that they always observe them too minutely in order to maintain their position in society, and often indulge in useless and even harmful practices, which cause nothing but inconvenience and worry. They give preference to unnecessary usages over the real and important necessities. Their criterion for judging what is proper and what is improper is the appreciation and disapproval of the common people. They do not have any opinion of their own and simply follow the common trend. At the other end, there are some other people who lead an isolated life and ignore all rules of society, and thus deprive themselves from all social benefits. They do not mix with other people and come to be known as cynics. To be successful in his objective, the spiritual traveler should follow the middle way. He should mix up with the people neither too much nor too little. It does not matter if he looked different from other people because of his distinct social behavior. He should not follow others and should not care for any criticism in this connection. Allah says, "They do not fear the criticism of any critic in the way of Allah." Surah Al-Ma'idah, chapter 5, verse 54. That means that the true believer sticks to what he thinks to be right. As a principle, it may be said that the spiritual traveler should weigh every matter seriously, and should not follow the wishes of other people or their opinion blindly. 2. Determination. As soon as the spiritual traveler begins his spiritual exercises, he is bound to face many unpleasant events. He is criticized by his friends and acquaintances, who are interested only in their selfish desires and current social customs. They taunt and upbraid the spiritual traveler in order to bring a change in his behavior and to turn him away from his objective. When these worldly people find that the spiritual traveler has a new style of life and his ways and manners have become different from their own, they feel upset and try their best to remove him by means of mockery and taunt from the line recently chosen by him. Thus, at every stage of his spiritual journey, the devotee has to face fresh difficulties which he can resolve only by means of his determination, perseverance, willpower, and trust in Allah. Let the believers place their trust in Allah. Surah Ali Imran, chapter 3, verse 122. 3. Moderation. It is one of those important principles which the spiritual traveler must follow, for a little negligence in this respect not only hampers his progress, but often as a consequence of a lack of attention to his principle, he may get tired of the spiritual journey itself. In the beginning, the spiritual traveler may show much zeal and fervor. In the middle, he may see wonderful manifestations of divine light, and consequently may decide to spend most of his time in acts of worship and make himself busy with prayer, bewailing, and weeping. Thus he may try to undertake everything good, and pick up a morsel of every spiritual dish. But this practice is not only not beneficial, but is also in many cases definitely harmful. Under too much pressure he may get fed up, leave the work incomplete, and cease to take interest in commendable acts. Too much enthusiasm in the beginning leads to too little interest in the end. Therefore, the spiritual traveler should not be misled by momentary zeal, and keeping in view his personal circumstances, should shoulder only as much a burden, or even less, as he is sure to be able to carry, permanently maintaining due interest in it. He should perform acts of worship when he is really inclined to them, and should withdraw from them when his desire to perform them has not still completely faded away. He may be compared to a man who wants to eat something. Such a man first of all should choose a dish that agrees to his temperament, and then should stop eating it before his belly is full. This principle of moderation is derived from that tradition also according to which Imam Ja'far Sadiq said to Abdul Aziz Karatisi, "Abdul Aziz, fate has 10 degrees, like the steps of a ladder, which are climbed one by one. If you find anyone below you by one step, pull him up to you gently, and do not burden him with what he cannot bear, or else you will break him." This tradition shows that, in principle, only those acts of worship are beneficial which are performed with zeal and eagerness. The following saying of Imam Sadiq also means the same thing. Do not force yourself to worship. 4. Steadiness. It means that after feeling penitence about a sin and asking Allah's forgiveness for it, it must not be committed again. Every vow must be fulfilled, and every promise made to the pious preceptor must be kept. 5. Continuance. Before explaining this point, it is necessary to make some preliminary remarks. The Quranic verses and religious reports show that everything we perceive by our senses, everything we do, and everything that exists or occurs has a corresponding truth, transcending this material and physical world, and not subject to any limitations of time and space. When these truths descend to this material world, they assume a tangible and palpable form. The Quran expressly says, "There is not a thing, the treasures of which we do not have with us, but we send down everything in an appointed measure." Surah Al-Hijr, verse 21. This verse essentially means that everything in this world has had an existence free from estimation and measurement prior to its material existence. When Allah intends to send a thing to this world, He appoints its measure, and so it becomes limited. No disaster befalls in the earth or in yourselves, but it is in a book before we bring it into being. Surely this is easy for Allah. Surah Al-Hadid, verse 22. As the external shape of everything is fixed and limited, and everything is subject to all the changes that are the characteristics of matter, such as coming into a shape and being disfigured, everything in this world is temporary, transient, and subject to decay. Allah says, "Whatever is with you is to be exhausted, and whatever is with Allah is to stay." Surah An-Nahl, verse 96. In other words, those abstract truths which are not subject to material characteristics, and the treasures of which are with Allah, are not to come to an end. The following tradition, which is accepted by the Shia and Sunni book, is also relevant in this connection. We, the prophets, have been ordered to speak to the people according to their intellectual capacity. This tradition relates to the description of the truths, not to their quantity. It says that the prophets simplify the higher truths and describe them in a way comprehensible to their address. Human mind, having been dazzled by the glamour of the world and being preoccupied with the futile desires, has become dull and rusty, and is not capable of comprehending the reality of the truths. The prophets may be compared to a man who wants to explain some truth to the children. Naturally, he will have to explain it in a way corresponding to the power of understanding and observation of the children. The same rule applies to the prophets, who are custodians of the divine teachings. Sometimes they describe the living truths in such a way that they appear to be lifeless, while as a matter of fact even the external rites such as prayer, fast, pilgrimage, zakat, khums, urging that what is right and restraining from that what is evil are all living and conscious truths. The spiritual traveler is he who by means of a spiritual journey and spiritual exercises seeks to purify his soul and intellect from all impurities, to be able to view the higher truths by the grace of Allah in this very life and this very world. It often happens that a devotee views the ablution and prayers in the real form and feels that from the viewpoint of perception and consciousness. Their real form is 1,000 times better than their physical form. The reports which have come down to us from the Imams show that the acts of worship will appear on the day of resurrection in their appropriate forms and will talk to the human beings. Even in the Quran, it has been mentioned that the ears, the eyes, and other organs will be speaking on that day. Similarly, the mosques, which appear to be composed of bricks and mortar, have a living and conscious reality. That is why some reports say that on the Day of Judgment, the mosques and the Holy Quran will make complaints to their Lord. One day a Gnostic was lying on his bed. When he turned from one side to the other, he heard a shriek coming out of the ground. He could not immediately know the reason. Subsequently, either he himself realized or somebody else pointed out to him that the ground, having been separated from him, was shrieking. After these preliminary remarks, now we come to our main point. By means of continuous practice, the spiritual traveler should imprint on his mind an abstract figure of each act of worship he performs, so that his practice of it may turn into a permanent habit. He should perform each deed again and again, and should not give it up till he begins to take delight in its performance. He cannot capture the permanent angelic aspect of a deed unless he continues to perform for quite a long time, so that its impression on his mind may become indelible. For this purpose he should choose a deed consistent with his inclination and aptitude, and then continue to perform it. For if a deed was abandoned prematurely, not only its good effects would be obliterated, but a reaction would also begin to appear. As a good deed is luminous, the reaction of its abandonment involves darkness and evil. The fact is that there is nothing but good with Allah, and all the evils, mischief, and wrongs are attributed to us. Therefore, man is responsible for all faults and defects. My Lord, evil cannot be attributed to you. This shows that Allah's favor is common to all. It is not a prerogative of any particular class. Allah's infinite mercy is for all human beings, whether Muslims, Jews, Christians, Zoroastrians, or idol worshippers. But some men, because of their wrongdoing, develop certain characteristics which make them unhappy. And so Allah's mercy makes some people happy and others distressed. 6. Meditation. This means that the spiritual traveler must at no time be forgetful of his duty and must always abide by the decision which he has taken. Meditation or contemplation is very vast in its meaning, and its sense differs according to the degrees and stages of the spiritual journey. In the beginning, it means refraining from all acts not useful in this world or the hereafter, and abstaining from saying or doing anything disliked by Allah. Gradually, this meditation becomes stiffer and higher, and may sometimes mean concentration on one's silence, or on oneself, or on a higher truth, that is the names and the attributes of Allah. The degrees and grades of this kind of meditation will be mentioned later. Here it may be mentioned that meditation is an important factor in spiritual journey. The leading Gnostics have laid great stress on it, and have described it as the foundation stone of spiritual journey, on which the edifice of remembrance and recollection of Allah rests. Without meditation, remembrance and recollection of Allah is not likely to produce any positive results. For a spiritual traveler, meditation is as important as for a patient the prescribed course of diet, without which the medicines may be ineffective or may even produce counter-effects. That is why the most outstanding spiritual guides do not allow any liturgies and recollection of Allah without meditation. Seven. Checking. It means that the spiritual traveler should every day have a fixed time for checking and assessing what he has done during the past 24 hours. The idea of this checking has been derived from what Imam Musa ibn Ja'far has said: "He who does not take account of himself every day is not one of us." If on checking the spiritual traveler finds that he has not done his duty, he should seek forgiveness from Allah, and if he finds that he has performed his duty in every respect, he should be thankful to him. 8. Censuring. If the spiritual traveler finds that he is guilty of some lapse or error, he should take some suitable action to reprimand or punish himself. 9. Hastening. This means that the spiritual traveler should be quick in implementing the decision he has taken. as he is likely to face many obstacles in his way. He should be vigilant and careful, and should try to achieve his objective without wasting a moment. 10. Faith and reliance. The spiritual traveler must have love for and implicit faith in the Holy Prophet and his rightful successors. Complete reliance and trusts are especially necessary at this stage. The more the reliance, the more lasting the effect of good deeds. As all the existing things are the creation of Allah, the spiritual traveler must love all of them and should have regard for them according to the grade of their dignity. A lover of Allah shows kindness to all men and animals. According to a tradition, affection for the creation is a part of faith in Allah. Another tradition says, Allah, I seek of you your love and the love of him who loves you. 11. Observance of the rules of veneration. The observance of these rules of correct behavior towards all and his vicegerents is different from the faith and reliance mentioned above. Here, veneration means to be careful not to exceed one's limits and do anything inconsistent with the requirements of a man's servitude to Allah. It is essential for man to observe his limits vis-à-vis his Creator, the essentially existing being. This veneration is a requirement of this world of plurality, whereas faith and love naturally require attention to monotheism, the unity of Allah. Faith and veneration stand in the same relationship to each other, as an act obligatory and an act prohibited. While performing an obligatory act, the devotee looks towards Allah, and while abstaining from a prohibited act, he looks towards his own limitations, lest he should exceed them. Veneration means following a middle way between fear and hope. Not to observe the rules of veneration indicates too much familiarity, which is extremely undesirable. The distinctive characteristic of the late Haji Mirza Ali Agha Qazi was his cheerfulness and faith rather than fear. The same was true of the late Haji Sheikh Muhammad Bahar. On the contrary, the predominant feature of Haji Mirza Jawid Agha Maliki was fear rather than hope and cheerfulness. That is what is indicated by their sayings. According to the Gnostic parlance, he who is dominated by cheerfulness is called a drunkard, and he who is dominated by fear is called a hymnist. The best thing is to adopt a middle way in between these two extremes. In other words, the devotee should have the highest degree of both the qualities at one and the same time. This degree of excellence is found in the case of Imams only. In short, man who is a possibly existing being should not forget his limits. That is why Imam Ja'far Sadiq used to prostrate himself on the ground whenever anything smacking extremism was uttered by anybody about him. An absolutely dutiful devotee is he who always considers himself to be present before Allah and observes all the rules of propriety and deference while doing anything such as talking, keeping quiet, eating, drinking, sleeping, etc. If the devotee kept the names and attributes of Allah in his mind, he would automatically observe all the rules of veneration and would always be conscious of his humility.